The house at the end of the road. The house stood defiant at the road's bitter end, a lonely sentinel against the encroaching wilderness. It wasn't the kind of house you'd choose for comfort. Its gables cast long, hungry shadows, and its windows stared out like vacant eyes. But it was cheap, and solitude was my muse. Little did I know it was also a gateway to a nightmare I hadn't yet dared to imagine. The first few nights were blessedly quiet. The only sounds the wind moaning through the ancient trees and the distant hooting of an owl. But on the fourth night, just as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard it, a slow, deliberate knocking on the front door. My heart hammered in my chest as I crept downstairs, my hand closing around a heavy fireplace poker. Through the peephole, I saw nothing but the impenetrable darkness. Yet the knocking persisted, each thud echoing through the silent house. I flung open the door, ready to face whatever horror awaited, but there was nothing there. Only the cold night air and the lingering sense of unease. The next night it came again. And the next. Each night, the knocking grew louder, more insistent, as if something out there was growing impatient. I began to dread the setting sun, the lengthening shadows that heralded the arrival of my unseen visitor. One morning, I awoke to find muddy footprints tracking through the house, leading to rooms I hadn't yet explored. The footprints were large, almost inhumanly so, and they filled me with a primal fear. It was as if something had breached the sanctity of my home, marking its territory. Then the knocking changed. It became a rhythm, a slow, steady countdown. 3 knocks. Pause. 2 knocks. Pause. 1 knock. The pattern repeated, relentless, like a ticking clock. A countdown to what? I didn't know, but the dread coiled in my stomach, a cold, unrelenting serpent. I had to find out what was happening, what was waiting for me when the knocking stopped. But how? The house was my prison, the road my only escape. And the knocking continued, each thud a reminder that time was running out. The house itself seemed to hold its breath, its silence a stark contrast to the rhythmic pounding at the door. Desperation clawed at me. I couldn't simply wait for the inevitable. I had to act. I ventured into the unexplored rooms, the ones the footprints had led to. Cobwebs clung to my face, and the air hung heavy with the scent of decay. In the furthest room, I found a trapdoor hidden beneath a moth-eaten rug. My heart hammered in my chest as I pried it open, revealing a set of rickety stairs leading down into darkness. Armed with a flashlight and the fireplace poker, I descended into the unknown. The air grew colder, damper, the only sound the drip, drip, drip of unseen water. The beam of my flashlight danced over rough-hewn walls, revealing glimpses of forgotten horrors. Strange symbols scrawled in what looked like dried blood, and the skeletal remains of small animals. At the bottom of the stairs, I found a long, narrow tunnel. It stretched into the darkness, its end shrouded in shadow. The knocking continued overhead, its rhythm echoing through the subterranean passage. I had no choice but to follow the tunnel, my footsteps disturbing the silence, my breath catching in my throat. The tunnel twisted and turned, its walls closing in, the air growing thick with an oppressive sense of dread. And then I saw it, a faint light flickering in the distance. Hope flared within me, a desperate beacon in the encroaching darkness. As I drew closer, the light grew brighter, revealing a cavernous chamber. The source of the light was a single flickering candle, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. And in the center of the chamber, silhouetted against the candlelight, stood a figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, its form shrouded in a ragged cloak. Its head was bowed, but I could sense its presence, a palpable weight that pressed down on me, stealing my breath. The knocking stopped. A deathly silence descended, broken only by the soft crackle of the candle flame. And then the figure slowly raised its head. The figure's face was a mask of decay, its skin stretched taut over bone, its eyes sunken and empty. A skeletal grin split its face, revealing rows of jagged teeth. It was a vision of death incarnate, a specter risen from the depths of the earth. A guttural growl rumbled from its throat, a sound that chilled me to the bone. It took a step towards me, its movement slow and deliberate, each footfall echoing through the chamber. I raised the fireplace poker, my knuckles white, my body trembling. "Stay back!" I croaked, my voice barely a whisper. The figure paused, its head tilting to one side as if considering my feeble defiance. Then it lunged. I swung the poker, connecting with its shoulder. A sickening crunch echoed through the chamber, but the figure didn't even flinch. It grabbed my arm, its grip like iron, its touch sending a wave of icy cold through my veins. I screamed, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence of the cavern. It dragged me towards the candle, its skeletal fingers digging into my flesh. I struggled, kicking and flailing, but it was no use. The candlelight grew brighter, its flame casting grotesque shadows across the figure's face. And then I saw it. The candle wasn't just a candle. It was a human skull, its eye sockets hollow, its jaw agape in a silent scream. The flame flickered within the skull, its light illuminating the chamber with an unholy glow. The figure forced me to my knees before the skull candle. Its grip tightened on my arm, its breath hot and fetid against my cheek. "The offering," it rasped, its voice a death rattle. "The offering must be made." I thrashed, my eyes wide with terror. The figure's grin widened, revealing even more of its jagged teeth. It raised its other hand, its skeletal fingers poised to strike. And then the chamber was filled with a blinding light. The light was so intense it felt like my eyes were burning. I squeezed them shut, my ears ringing with a high-pitched whine. When I dared to open them again, the figure was gone. The skull candle still flickered, but its light seemed dimmer, its shadows less menacing. I stumbled to my feet, my body aching, my mind reeling. The chamber seemed to pulse with an eerie silence, the only sound the soft crackle of the flame. I turned to flee, but a voice stopped me in my tracks. "Wait," it said. The voice was soft, almost gentle, a stark contrast to the guttural growl of the figure. I spun around, my heart pounding. Standing near the entrance to the tunnel was a woman. She was dressed in a simple white gown, her hair long and flowing. Her face was pale, her eyes large and luminous. She looked like an angel, a beacon of hope in this subterranean nightmare. "Who are you?" I stammered. "I am the guardian," she said. "The guardian of this place." "What place?" I asked, my voice trembling. "This is the threshold," she said. "The threshold between worlds." "And that thing?" I gestured towards the skull candle. "It is the gatekeeper," she said. "It demands an offering." "An offering?" I repeated, my stomach churning. "What kind of offering?" The woman's eyes filled with sadness. "A life," she said. "A human life." I stared at her, my mind struggling to comprehend. "But why?" "It is the price," she said. "The price for crossing the threshold." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. "But I didn't want to cross any threshold," I protested. "I just wanted to live in my house." The woman sighed. "The house is built on the threshold," she said. "It has always been a gateway." "But the knocking," I said. "The countdown." "It was the gatekeeper," she said, "calling for its offering." I looked at the skull candle, its flame flickering weakly. "So what now?" I asked. The woman stepped closer, her eyes filled with compassion. "You must leave," she said. "Leave this place and never return." "But—" I started to protest, but she raised a hand to silence me. "There is no other way," she said. "The gatekeeper will not rest until it has its offering." She reached out and touched my arm. Her touch was warm, comforting, a stark contrast to the icy grip of the figure. "Go," she said, "and do not look back." I stumbled back through the tunnel, my legs heavy, my heart filled with a mixture of fear and gratitude. The woman's words echoed in my mind, a dire warning that I couldn't ignore. I had to leave, and I had to leave now. Back in the house, the first light of dawn was filtering through the windows, casting long, eerie shadows across the floor. The muddy footprints were still there, a stark reminder of the horror that lurked beneath. I grabbed a few essentials, my wallet, my keys, a change of clothes, and fled. I didn't look back as I drove away, the house shrinking in the rearview mirror. The road stretched out before me, a ribbon of asphalt leading back to civilization. I drove for hours, the sun climbing higher in the sky, the landscape changing from dense forest to rolling hills. By the time I reached the nearest town, I was exhausted, my body trembling with adrenaline. I checked into a motel, the anonymity of the room a welcome relief. I showered, changed clothes, and tried to eat, but the food tasted like ashes in my mouth. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the gatekeeper was still searching for its offering. I kept the curtains drawn, the lights off, my ears straining for any sound that might herald its arrival. Sleep was impossible. I paced the room, my mind racing, my thoughts a jumble of fear and confusion. Who was the woman? What was the threshold? And why had I been chosen as the offering? As the hours ticked by, my fear began to morph into anger. I had been violated, my life turned upside down by forces I didn't understand. I wanted revenge, retribution. I wanted to go back to that house, to confront the gatekeeper, to make it pay for what it had done to me. But the woman's warning echoed in my mind. "Do not look back." She had said it with such conviction, such finality. Was it a threat? Or a plea? I didn't know. But I knew one thing: I couldn't go back. Not yet. I needed to understand what I was dealing with, to find a way to fight back. I spent the next few days researching, scouring the internet for any information about the house, the road, the surrounding area. I found nothing. It was as if the place didn't exist, as if it had been erased from history. Frustrated and exhausted, I decided to take a walk, to clear my head. The town was small, its streets lined with quaint shops and cafes. The sun was shining, the air crisp and clean. It was a world away from the darkness of the house at the end of the road. As I walked, I noticed a bookstore tucked away on a side street. Its window display was filled with old leather-bound books, their titles faded and worn. Intrigued, I stepped inside. The store was dimly lit, its shelves overflowing with books of all shapes and sizes. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and dust. Behind the counter, an elderly woman sat reading, her glasses perched on the tip of her nose. "Can I help you?" she asked, looking up from her book. "I'm just browsing," I said, my eyes scanning the shelves. "Take your time," she said, returning to her book. I wandered through the store, my fingers trailing along the spines of the books. And then I saw it. A book tucked away on a bottom shelf, its cover barely visible beneath a layer of dust. I reached for it, my heart quickening. The title was simple yet chilling: The Guardians of the Threshold. I pulled the book from the shelf, my hands trembling. Its cover was worn, its pages yellowed with age. I opened it carefully, the musty smell of old paper filling my nostrils. The first page was blank, but the second page contained a single handwritten sentence. "Beware the gatekeeper. It guards the threshold, and it demands a price." A chill ran down my spine. It was the same warning the woman had given me. But who had written it? And when? I flipped through the book, my eyes scanning the pages. It was filled with strange symbols and diagrams, interspersed with handwritten notes in a language I didn't recognize. It was like a puzzle, a cryptic message waiting to be deciphered. I took the book to the counter, my heart pounding. "I'd like to buy this," I said, placing it on the counter. The elderly woman looked up from her book, her eyes widening slightly. "That's a very old book," she said. "Are you sure you want it?" "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "I'm sure." She nodded slowly, a flicker of concern crossing her face. She wrapped the book in brown paper and handed it to me. "Be careful," she said. "Some books are best left unread." I paid for the book and left the store, my mind buzzing with questions. I returned to the motel, eager to delve deeper into the book's secrets. Back in my room, I spread the book out on the bed, my flashlight illuminating its pages. I spent hours poring over the symbols and diagrams, trying to make sense of them. The handwritten notes were even more baffling, their cryptic language a barrier to understanding. Frustration gnawed at me. I felt like I was on the verge of a breakthrough, but the answers remained just out of reach. I closed the book, rubbing my eyes. I needed a break, a fresh perspective. I decided to go for another walk, this time venturing further from the town center. The streets grew quieter, the houses more spread out. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the landscape. As I walked, I noticed a figure standing in the distance, silhouetted against the fading light. It was tall and slender, its form shrouded in a long coat. It stood motionless, its head bowed as if in deep contemplation. Curiosity drew me closer. As I approached, the figure raised its head. Its face was pale, its eyes dark and piercing. It was the woman from the cavern. "You shouldn't have come back," she said, her voice soft but firm. My heart skipped a beat. "I had to," I said. "I need answers." She sighed. "Answers can be dangerous," she said. "Sometimes it's better not to know." "But I have to know," I insisted. "I have to understand." She studied me for a moment, her eyes searching my face. Then she nodded slowly. "Very well," she said. "Follow me." I followed the woman as she led me down a narrow path that wound through a wooded area. The trees grew thicker, their branches intertwining overhead, creating a canopy that blocked out the last vestiges of daylight. The air grew cooler, damper, the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves filling my nostrils. We walked in silence, the only sound the crunch of our footsteps on the forest floor. I glanced at the woman, but her face was impassive, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. I wanted to ask her questions, to demand answers, but something about her presence held me back. After what felt like an eternity, we emerged from the woods into a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a small stone cottage. Its windows were dark, its door slightly ajar. A single lantern flickered on the porch, casting a faint glow on the surrounding area. The woman stopped at the edge of the clearing, her eyes fixed on the cottage. "This is my home," she said. "It is also a sanctuary." "A sanctuary?" I repeated. "A place of refuge," she said. "A place where those who seek answers can find them." I looked at the cottage, its humble appearance belying its apparent significance. "Can I come in?" I asked. She nodded. "But be warned," she said. "The answers you seek may not be the ones you desire." I followed her to the cottage, my heart pounding in my chest. We stepped onto the porch, the lantern light illuminating her face. Her expression was grave, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. She pushed open the door, revealing a dimly lit room. The air was heavy with the scent of incense and old wood. Bookshelves lined the walls, their shelves overflowing with ancient tomes. In the center of the room, a large table stood, its surface covered with maps, charts, and strange instruments. The woman gestured for me to enter. I stepped into the room, my eyes wide with wonder. It was like stepping into another world, a world of secrets and hidden knowledge. "Sit," she said, pointing to a chair at the table. I sat down, my hands clasped in my lap. The woman took a seat opposite me, her eyes meeting mine. "You seek answers," she said. "But first, you must understand the question." "The question?" I repeated, confused. "The question that lies at the heart of all things," she said. "The question that binds the worlds together." She leaned forward, her eyes burning with intensity. "The question is this," she said. "What is the price of knowledge?" I stared at the woman, her question hanging heavy in the air. The price of knowledge? I had never considered it before. I had always assumed that knowledge was a good thing, something to be sought after, something that could empower and enlighten. But now I wasn't so sure. "The gatekeeper demanded a price," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "A human life." The woman nodded slowly. "The gatekeeper guards the threshold between worlds," she said. "It demands a sacrifice for those who seek to cross." "But why?" I asked. "Why does it demand such a terrible price?" "Because knowledge is power," she said, "and power comes at a cost." I thought about the book I had found, the cryptic symbols and diagrams, the handwritten notes in a language I couldn't understand. It was knowledge, yes, but what good was it if it couldn't be deciphered, if it couldn't be used? "The book," I said. "The guardians of the threshold, what does it mean?" The woman smiled sadly. "It is a warning," she said. "A warning to those who seek to unlock the secrets of the threshold." "But I don't want to unlock any secrets," I protested. "I just want to go back to my life." The woman's eyes softened. "Your life has changed," she said. "You have seen things that cannot be unseen. You have knowledge that cannot be forgotten." I looked down at my hands, the lines etched deep into my palms. I had aged, I realized. The ordeal had taken its toll. "What do I do now?" I asked, my voice filled with despair. The woman reached across the table and took my hand. Her touch was warm, comforting. "You have a choice," she said. "You can use your knowledge for good, or you can let it consume you." I looked into her eyes, their depths filled with wisdom and compassion. "I want to use it for good," I said. "But I don't know how." She smiled. "You will find a way," she said. "The path may be difficult, but the rewards will be great." I left the cottage that night, the woman's words echoing in my mind. I returned to the motel, the book tucked safely in my bag. I spent the next few days studying it, deciphering its symbols and translating its notes. It was a slow, painstaking process, but gradually the pieces began to fall into place. I learned about the threshold, the gateway between worlds. I learned about the gatekeeper, its insatiable hunger for knowledge. And I learned about the guardians, those who sought to protect the threshold from those who would abuse its power. I also learned about myself. I learned that I was stronger than I thought, more resilient than I believed. I had faced darkness and survived. I had seen the true cost of knowledge, and I had chosen to use it for good. I left the town a few days later, the book still in my possession. I didn't know where I was going or what I would do, but I knew one thing: I was no longer afraid. I traveled the country, sharing my knowledge with those who sought it. I helped others who had encountered the threshold, guiding them away from its dangers. I became a guardian, a protector of the delicate balance between worlds. And as I traveled, I thought often of the woman in the cottage, her words of wisdom and encouragement a constant source of strength. I never saw her again, but I knew that she was always there, watching over me, guiding me on my path. The house at the end of the road remained a haunting memory, a reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of the world. But it was also a symbol of hope, a testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome even the greatest of challenges. And so I continued on my journey, my heart filled with gratitude and determination. I had paid the price of knowledge, and I was ready to face whatever the future held.